So we could actually end up in a situation where, God forbid, the thing doesn't think that we're necessary. It could actually eradicate us. And it won't be like Skynet. It won't be like Terminator where a bunch of scrappy humans are fighting back. It'll like kill us at the cellular level and we won't even know it. So that's a nice thought.
America is divided because our powerful federal government pits red states against blue. We need to return power to the states and to the people by decentralizing. If that fails, we must be prepared for a peaceful national divorce or face a destructive civil war. Welcome to War, Divorce, or Federalism. America at a crossroads.
Okay, Spike Cohen is former Libertarian Party vice presidential nominee from 2020 and founder of You Are the Power, a grassroots network that uses single-issue, municipal-level activism to take power out of government's hands and put it back into yours. He's known for sharp libertarian messaging and unflagging defense of voluntary solutions over government programs, and for turning viral moments into real-world policy wins. Spike, thank you very much for joining us. I'm particularly excited to have you on, not only for your ideology, your love of freedom, but also for your projects that seem to align very much with the discussions we have on WDF when it comes to decentralizing or federalizing, and the discussion about polarization, national divorce, and so forth. So welcome.
Absolutely, man. I'm happy to be on.
First question I have for you: What is your thought when you hear about this? The premise of this show, War, Divorce, or Federalism. The idea being that a strong, centralized government is, in large part, responsible for the polarization, for loss of freedom, for increased regulations, for increased debt, and that the key to our happiness is to federalize or decentralize. And if we can't do that, we really should be looking at national divorce. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I would say of the WDNF, I hope we're choosing between DNF. I'm a big fan. I say even though we, as libertarians, I think we seek nothing short of a revolution, I pray it's a peaceful one. You know, it's easy for us to get very triumphalist and start beating our chest and talking about how, you know, it's time for the tree of liberty, it's time for it to taste the blood of tyrants. And even though that's not necessarily untrue, but yeah, I don't want war. And it's easy to say that behind a keyboard. It's another thing to try to actually live that out. I don't want war. I would like to continue living a peaceful lifestyle if at all possible. And that leads itself to any kind of decentralization that can happen in a peaceful way. So yeah, I'm glad that these kinds of conversations are being had, because this is far more useful than just, you know, creating an anonymous account on social media and looking suspiciously like a Fed every time I talk.
Right, exactly. And I think if we talk freely and openly, have a good discussion about national divorce or about how do we federalize or decentralize, and is it even possible? Yeah. Having those discussions will sort of keep us away from the big W there. So,
and the reason being that the big W can happen if things continue to get worse and worse and worse and worse. It can conceivably happen. We can talk more later about how feasible I think that is for the American people to actually want to go to war internally. But all that to say, the best way to avoid that is, like you said, de-escalation. Decentralization is de-escalation. It's de-escalation from the conflict machine and the conflict inducing outcomes that keep happening as a result of further and further centralization. So no, this is the antidote to the problem that we talk about.
Good. Well, I'm glad we're on the same page. So let's start digging into that. What does that look like for you? What would be if we're looking at not national divorce at this point in the discussion, but decentralizing, federalizing, what would be, and if you were to take a stepwise process, what would be the first step? What power, what do you want to take away from Washington and give back to the states?
Yeah, I think I'm not sure if this is the one that you're talking about, but I would say anything that's not explicitly written in the Constitution. It's hard to pick. I guess I could arbitrarily pick one like healthcare or education or something like that. But ultimately, if you just take this one, then it leaves all these other ones, and they're so intermingled that you can argue that it doesn't actually really pull it down unless you're looking at it from a holistic standpoint and saying, the founders had a reason for saying that this is the only stuff we're going to have the federal government doing. And even to add because some people will say, well, this time if we rewrite the Constitution or if we amend it, this time we should put at the end, and this time we mean it. But that's already there. It's called the 10th Amendment. It flat out says that if there's nothing that's written, anything that's not written here as a power to the government should be left to the states or the people. Maybe I change it to preferably the people, but regardless, it should be left to the states or to the people, right? Meaning, and when it says the people, that means just to us to voluntarily come up with it, where there's no government involvement, right? So I think that anything that doesn't, that isn't explicitly written in the Constitution. Now, a lot of conservative friends are going to agree with that until they take a perusal of the Constitution and see that immigration's never actually mentioned. Naturalization is, which is the process by which people who are already here become citizens. But for the first 100 years of the United States existence, there was effectively no restriction on who could come here. There were very, very high standards for who could become a citizen and the process you had to go to. But if you were just coming here and you were doing so peacefully, there was actually nothing stopping that. So there are and there are many things: healthcare, education, public safety, meaning anything related to guns. There were at some local level, there were some weapons controls and things like that. Like you couldn't have a Bowie knife in certain municipalities and things like that. But that was local. It wasn't at the federal level. So yeah, I guess if I had to pick one thing, this is probably I'm probably cheating a little, but it would be anything that's not explicitly listed in the enumeration of powers.
Yeah. In other words, following the 10th Amendment, as you said.
Yes.
Isn't that crazy?
The radical idea that our government's charter should be followed. It's insane, I think.
I know. All these things are, these radical ideas we have, and really what it boils down to is just follow the document that you said you were sworn to follow.
Stop breaking the law. It's the craziest thing.
Yeah, it really is.
That people call us the bloodthirsty radicals, and I'm like, no. We're literally, if you just read the Constitution, and even when we talk about the Constitution, I'm going to try not to go off on a tangent here, but when you read the Constitution, when you even say, the Constitution, there are so many people, mostly on the left, but even some on the right, who are like, yeah, but we have to get real here. And I'm like, yeah, no. So anyway, like I was saying, the government's founding charter, the thing that makes it legitimate, the thing that makes it not just a roving band of warlords, is the Constitution. Ostensibly, the whole reason that we all say, yep, this government is legitimate and we shouldn't revolt against it, is that it has this Constitution, right? Well, the Constitution is very clear in what it should and shouldn't be doing, and it's routinely just flouting it. So yeah, I would say that all things being considered, if the law, the primary law in this country, which is the Constitution, is saying what we're saying, and the people in charge aren't doing that, that makes them the wild-eyed radicals and not us.
Yeah, exactly. So when it comes to federalization or decentralizing, I don't have much hope. Do you have much hope that it can come from the top down, from Washington, D.C., that they would voluntarily sort of federalize the way our founding fathers envisioned?
As long as the American people continue to think that the way that they do, I don't have any hope for top-down federalization. I don't have hope for a peaceful divorce. I don't have hope for any of the different mechanisms that people in the liberty-loving sphere of politics propose. We look at things very mechanistically, like, well, maybe if we do a Article 5 Convention of States. Yeah, so I don't want to skip too far ahead, but any of these things, if the people are still demanding that the government protect them and keep them safe and help meet their needs and make things fair, then things are just going to keep getting worse. Taking a big step back, the progressives won in that they got it so that the average person thinks progressively in terms of our relation to the government. And that's why if Republicans win, the government gets bigger, more involved in our lives, more debt, more taxes, more spending, more overseas involvement, more domestically on this side of the sea involvement. And if Democrats win, same thing. And so they get their way. They can complain. It's funny because progressives complain more than anyone else. And yet they're routinely getting their way. Their landscape of policy prescriptions continues to creep forward no matter who wins. And it's because the people demand it.
Yeah.
The people demand that you don't. I remember seeing, this was years ago now. I remember seeing like an ad or something that said, "Keep big government away from your Medicare."
Yeah.
And I thought, like, this is, as long as that's the mentality, I don't have much hope at all. That's actually why, with what we do at You Are the Power, in addition to helping people who are having their lives destroyed by government now, what we're also doing by bringing people in to see that they can actually affect change when enough of us get together to do so, we're also showing them the underlying idea behind why it happened in the first place, which is that we are routinely allowing government officials to treat us like something other than individual human beings. And to whatever extent we're not being treated like individual human beings through force, fraud, coercion, centralization of power away from us and towards a small handful of people, a relative handful of people, the worse things are for everyone. And if we can keep driving that home, that the more centralized things are, the less we're respected as individual human beings, the less happy we are, the less prosperous we are, the less harmonious we are, and ultimately the less free we are. If I can keep driving that home, and if we can keep having more and more people intuitively understand that, we can turn the tide so that the people don't demand to be protected by government. They demand to be left alone by government, or at the very least to be respected as an individual human being like government. And in that kind of an environment, I do have hope that the government will top down decentralize, because we won't tolerate anything. We'll just keep replacing them with people until they finally do it. I do have hope if we decide to do some. I don't think we'd need to do a peaceful divorce in that situation, but if we did, it would actually, I think, be peaceful. I do think that federalization would happen. I do think that whatever ended up happening would be towards the idea of us being freer and more prosperous and having more control over our day-to-day lives, because the people actually demand it. That's why the work that I do is increasingly of the space of not just helping people who need it now, like acute triage care, but also using it as an opportunity to share with people, this is why this stuff is happening in the first place.
Yeah, such good points you have there. The idea about, and it's in your organization as well, very strongly, of You Are the Power, about taking that power back, of forcing government to see you as an individual with inherent dignity, I guess we'll say. To me, dignity is a huge word. And that's where, you say the progressives have won. And I agree with you, because of how we think and what we demand. It's demanding stuff from government instead of demanding freedom. But if we can somehow message that what we lose in that transaction is our dignity, is our self-worth, and what we gain is dependence on government and loss of freedom. And I don't know, that sounds lofty. Is it wishful thinking to go against this 100-year tide of progressive thinking, that it's just how much you can get from an all-powerful government?
I think that it was lofty when the progressives started proposing it 100 plus years ago. And there are people that will argue, yeah, but the thing is, it's people more naturally want what's in their best interest. And so progressives are showing them that. Well, that's the whole point. They think it's in their best interest. It's incumbent upon. So to answer your question, I think it's lofty to think that we can do this solely through messaging. You and I and many others that are already in the liberty sphere, we got reached through messaging, which is why we tend to be disproportionately represented by more cerebral people. It's not for nothing that, I don't want to use the A word, but a lot of us are very neuro-libertarian. And so the fact is, but the reason we're attracting people like that, which is not bad, by the way, but the reason we tend to attract more cerebral thinking people is that we're using messaging and ideas primarily. We're not focusing on people. And even the idea of starting with people first feels weird to us, because it feels like we're manipulating people, but we're not. We're talking to them the way they want to be talked to. When you have a conversation with someone and you're talking about how government has made healthcare worse, we need to get government out of healthcare, and then someone says something like, yeah, but what if something happens to someone and they can't afford their healthcare? And we get frustrated because we're like, we then try to explain like how government makes things more expensive, but they keep going back to this like deeply seated fear that if they get a really rare disease, or if they get in a really bad accident, that they could lose everything in the process. And if they survive it, they end up with bankruptcy and debt from their medical bills. And at some point they might make the mistake of saying that they think they have a right to get health care. And instead of listening to what they're actually trying to say, which is, I'm scared for myself and others, we focus on them saying that something's a right. And so we attack it. We call them an idiot. We tell them that, they have no idea how rights work. And they're talking about positive rights, but there's only negative rights. And what they hear is, I don't care about you. I want to argue about stuff that I don't even really know that much about. And so we're talking past people. And so what we do at You Are the Power is we start with the people. I don't tell people that there's this horrific perverse incentive in the Social Security Act that's leading to too many diagnoses of abuse and too many false accusations of abuse to innocent parents. I talk about the parents that it's happening to. And I encourage people to join me in reaching out to the officials that are doing this to them and calling for them to back off. And then I show them another example and another example and another example. And then from there, I can show them, here's the underlying cause behind this, so that now we can, for example, get legislation passed in the state of Georgia and soon in other states as well, that fixes this problem at its core, at least fixes part of the problem. I couldn't have done that if I started with the legislation or the idea behind it. I had to start with people who could relate to other people. Human beings, especially those who maybe are, even us, even the more cerebral among us, we intuitively want to be seen as human beings, and we intuitively look at other people as human beings as well. It's something that's knit into our fabric. It's hardwired into us. And so if we focus on people first, not watering down our ideas or anything like that, but if we focus on people first, especially in our activism, then we can pull in people that may never even fully adopt our principles, but they're there acting alongside us and helping us spread our agenda. Most people that are, in fact, a good number of people that are progressives would get angry if you called them a progressive. They say, no, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool small government conservative. It's like, yeah, but you want more and more government, so you're a progressive. So people don't even necessarily have to reach a point where they say, I'm a constitutionalist, or I'm a libertarian, or I'm a voluntarist, or whatever you want to call it. But if they're interacting with our ideas and engaging with them and helping to spread them, then they're a non-libertarian in name only. So that's what I would say to that.
You're exactly right. It's all about messaging. You and I've seen it a lot with libertarians to be a little bit more caustic, because they're so deep into their cerebral understanding and their readings and so forth, that they push everyone off that maybe, as Lisa Kennedy says, might be liberty curious. And so I agree. I think your approach is exactly what's needed. So on You Are the Power, youarethepower.net, you've expressed values that the organization has, which include, among several others, autonomy, freedom, trust, dignity, and decentralization.
Yeah.
And then also under goals, I wanted to touch on one. One of the goals is nullification. So let's just go there for a brief moment. We've talked about how decentralization is ideal, federalizing is ideal, but is it going to happen? It's not going to happen top down. So therefore, hopefully, if it were to happen, it would happen bottom up. That sounds like nullification.
Yep.
Would you agree with me that marijuana is one form, what we've seen in the various states is one form of nullification?
It is, and I would argue it's probably the most successful one, at least in the U.S. It is still every bit as illegal to possess or use or distribute or grow cannabis now as it was 50 years ago. It is every bit just as illegal as it was. But what happened there? And what had to happen first? Well, we'll start with what happened. We've reached a point where the majority, I think it's like 2/3 of Americans, live in a city, county, or state where cannabis is legal some way, either just medicinally or completely recreationally or somewhere in between those or something like that, even though it is still every bit as illegal as it was 50 years ago, when it was just as big of a no-no to get caught with it as it was to get caught with, heroin or something like that. How did we get there? We got there because the vast majority of people think it should be completely legal to begin with. And they're not getting that from their federal officials. And so they went to their state and city and local officials and said, we want this legal. And whether you like that or not, I know there's some people that are against that, but whether you're against it or not, it's a perfect example of that. And what did it come from? It came from a change of mind from the people going to their officials and going, look, this has to happen. And I think at some point it will become legal at the federal level as well. I'm honestly shocked it hasn't. It just goes to show how deeply entrenched the, I guess we'll call it the cannabis enforcement industrial complex is. There's a lot of money being made from it being illegal. And so it's taking longer than I would have thought, especially when you consider that we might reach a point where almost all of the 50 states have made it legal before it becomes legal at the federal level. But yeah,
Right.
it's a perfect example of nullification. A more recent one that we're starting to see are our Second Amendment sanctuary laws.
Yes.
And that's been, I mean, in Missouri and in New Hampshire, they aren't allowed to cooperate with federal law enforcement. And if you understand the structure of how like the ATF works, when you see a lot of those people that are wearing like the ATF vests and stuff like that when they're doing raids and things like that, the vast majority of those people aren't actually ATF agents. They're deputized local law enforcement officials that are being deputized to act alongside maybe one actual on-site ATF agent to do those raids. They need that force multiplier, or else it becomes effectively impossible for them to be able to enforce it at scale. Another example, which again, some of my friends on the right aren't going to like, are the immigration sanctuary cities. Again, even if you don't like it, it's another example of it where they say, yeah, we're not going to cooperate with this. ICE can come in and do raids. We're not forbidding federal agents from enforcing laws, just like with Second Amendment or cannabis nullification. We're just not going to cooperate with them. So yeah, these are all effective examples. But in every case, or at least in most of those cases, what happened first was a heart change among the people in that jurisdiction, saying, yeah, we don't want this. So don't cooperate with the feds. So I think as we get more people on our side, I think a natural outgrowth is going to look like a lot more nullification as we work our way towards hopefully our lips to God's ears, seeing it actually, being dismantled at the federal level.
Yeah. I like the Second Amendment Preservation Act conceptually because it works with so many different facets of where there's government overreach. Because we say in Second Amendment, we say, okay, if there are any federal laws that are more restrictive than our own state laws, our local and state officials are not permitted to enforce the federal laws. Yeah. It's simple, it's clean, it's beautiful, and I think there's a lot of potential out there for that to continue.
Yeah. No, I like it, and I think you could eventually see it moved on to a lot of other things as well. But I think it's a great example, and it led to. You'll notice it was shortly after that started that we started seeing state after state introduce constitutional carry. Like they went hand in hand. It's like constitutional carry, and which basically means if you have constitutional carry, some states have what they call that, but it's not really. But like in South Carolina, we went from having. I live in Myrtle Beach. South Carolina went from having like some of the most restrictive gun laws in the Southeast to having we have open, closed carry, whatever you want with no permit needed. There's still a permit that you can get if you want to have one. You can voluntarily choose to get one, but there's no permit required to carry or anything like that. We do have an interesting wrinkle in the law that if you break a law using a gun and don't have a carry permit, then you get like enhancement of your sentence for that. So what they basically said is, listen, if you want to be a criminal, get your permit first. All that to say that, if you have a law like that, coupled with another law that says anything that is above in restriction to what we have in place, we're not going to enforce. You're effectively saying we're not going to enforce any infringement on the Second Amendment, which is every gun law is an infringement on the Second Amendment. So yeah, no, I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Well, maybe there's hope for nullification to move us to a decentralized government. How about, you touched on it earlier, Article 5. So in Article 5 convention, it's in the Article 5 of the Constitution that says the states can amend the Constitution. So there are skeptics, there are people that are fearful, and you touched on one thing that I think is the best argument opposed to it. I, by the way, was a delegate in 2015, I think it was, from North Dakota to the mock convention of states for an Article 5. But the best argument I've heard is we have a perfectly good constitution. If we're not abiding by it, then what difference does it make if you make a new constitution? So that's a really good argument. Now, maybe you could clarify some gray areas. But I don't think they were gray to begin with. I'll let you.
I was going to say it's not really gray. So just taking a bit of a step back for those who may not know the details of how an Article 5 Convention of States work. It's not like your favorite small government influencers are the ones that are rewriting it. It's the state legislators. So the idea is that if, 3/5 of the states ratify it, then they can call an Article 5 Convention of States. And then each state sends a delegation of state legislators that come together to rewrite potentially to to rewrite the Constitution. Now they've claimed that they can say ahead of time that they will only do it for a specific number of things, that it's not going to be a complete wide open rewriting of the Constitution. But here's the thing, that's not what Article 5 says. Yes, they can go in with that idea, but once the horse trading actually happens, there's nothing legally binding them to that. They can, once you've opened that box, they could potentially rewrite the Constitution. And so I'll just ask everyone watching this, who do you trust more to put in place a good Constitution? The founders or your current crop of state legislators?
Yeah.
Like, we laugh when we say it, but that's literally what the thing is. And I don't want to beat up my Article 5 friends, because I get where you're coming from. They're not respecting the Constitution. You know, maybe if we added some wording to it, they'd have to follow it. Our Constitution is very clear. It takes disingenuousness at all three branches of government and an apathetic public for us to have what we have right now. It's not that it wasn't written well. Yeah, sure, you could be a little more clear on this and that, but that's not what the problem is, because we have the Federalist Papers, right? They can refer back to what the founders actually intended by reading what they said and reading the minutes or transcripts from when they were actually deliberating over these amendments. It's not like it was mystery done in a smoke-filled room. This was very public, and there's lots of writings about it and extemporaneous letters to each other and things like that. It's very clear what they meant, and the powers that be routinely flout it. Now, part of the reason they can get away with it, I mean, the reason they do it is because, you know, you're giving them this powerful government and the power of the purse. Why not ignore it? The one thing that would stop them is a public that demands it. I know I'm beating a drum here, but, you know, call me Spike messaging discipline, because that's what I'm good at. If the public's not on board, it doesn't matter what you do. And if the public continues to basically demand progressivism, you're going to end up with a progressive Constitution. What happens when the people go in and they want a stronger wording of the Second Amendment this time around that doesn't have any preamble about a well-regulated militia, and it just says you can have whatever gun you want, and the Democrats that show up go, all right, we want a right to health care. I am against an Article 5 Convention of States. I understand the frustration and the desire behind it, and I love all my Article 5 friends. I do not want our Constitution written by even if it was just the Republicans that are in our current crop of state legislators. I wouldn't trust them to, or even if we handpicked a bunch of libertarians to do it, I wouldn't trust them to make a better document that's going to be any better at holding up to the apathetic public and the corrupt officials than the current one that we have right now. I think we have a pretty good one right now. We need to follow it.
We do indeed. All right, so federalizing top down is not going to work. Bottom up could work, but it might take a million years. And in Article 5, we're concerned about runaway convention. So
yeah.
Let's talk national divorce.
Okay.
What do you think can be done to ensure that it would be peaceful? Texas is hot on the trail for wanting to secede. You've got other states or portions of states that want to move away from the other portions. How do you see initiation of a national divorce best happening peacefully?
This is a tough one, because in theory, it sounds like, you know, it's like, yeah, if people don't want to be united we stand. They want to try to stand divided. I would say that, and again, I think that this is something that if the people are still demanding progressivism, first of all, I don't think a divorce would happen in that environment, because the greatest thing that politicians can point to as to why we shouldn't have a national divorce is they'll go, well, how do we keep all the stuff going that we've been doing? And so, you know, if you tell someone that, this might affect their, and I don't want to pick on a specific person, so I'll come up with a few different things, but, you know, that this will affect their Medicare and their Social Security, that this will affect their income adjusted student loan restructuring, that this will affect their Medicaid, that this will affect their, even just the healthcare stuff is enough to get people to go, I don't, let's just leave it as it is.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how realistic it is. I would say if we're just, just as a hypothetical, like a thought experiment, I would say the only way it's going to be peaceful is if it leads in an ironic and peaceful fashion. That the I guess the first principle moving forward of trying to do the divorce is coming up with the most peaceful way of doing it. I'm not convinced that a national divorce that is geared towards peace is going to result in us being on the balance more free. I may be wrong, but I think again, you split up a country, even splitting up a large city, much less a country of hundreds of millions of people, and factoring in things like nukes and debt and all these other things. I know you want to get into those things, but like there's going to be so much horse trading involved by the political class. Anytime you got them doing more work and writing up more documents, we usually end up less free because we're when they're horse trading, we're the horses, like we're the cattle that are getting traded around. So I'm not convinced that that's a good way to do it. Again, unless the people are demanding not progressivism, not creeping mission creep by government, but demanding to be respected as individual human beings. But I think again, as a thought experiment, I think that the only way it can be done in a peaceful fashion is if it's led from the primary standpoint of like rule one is that this has to be done in such a way that it's not going to drive conflict in the future. And even though that's not possible to ensure certainly in perpetuity, it could at least lead to short-term resolution of conflict so that potential longer-term problems can be resolved before those become that kind of a problem.
Right. Yeah, I tend to think that a smaller central government, whether it's over a coalition of local states, say the Southeast or the Heartland or Pacifica, whatever it might be, would be more likely to have more freedom for the citizens that live within that smaller government. Closest to you governs best, as we always hear.
Yeah.
Your organization works a lot in municipalities. Do you think, I hear a lot about, well, a national divorce doesn't really make sense. It's red versus blue. It's not geographical and what have you. And there are a lot of states that are red, except for the very, very large single or dual urban center that is blue. What do you think about a Spartan like the city-states of Greece, Athens, Sparta, and so forth? Do you think that a city-state would be able to provide maximal freedom because it would be so compact and directly involved with the people living there?
Very potentially. And this is actually, as you're saying that, I'm realizing that this is something that also kind of helps answer your other question. Part of freedom is economic freedom. And it's hard to overstate how much of our day-to-day freedom comes from the fact that we are largely free to trade with people, especially internally within the US. So I think any kind of split, whether it's at a state level, at a municipal level, even if it's at where the United States stays in place, but you see a lot of the states subdividing, all of those would work better if there's still some kind of common market or common, basically entirely free trade. So free trade with zero restrictions on trade, the same way that we have now. It is really hard to overstate how one of the biggest reasons that the United States economy is so much more powerful than any other economy, except for China, which we created by choking ourselves off and basically making all the jobs go there. But anyway, it's a whole other, that's another episode you can have me come on to talk about the West desire to pretend to be ecologically friendly by choking themselves intentionally and giving all the jobs to the third world and then wondering why they became more prosperous than us. Anyway, so going back to this, big part of why we're such an incredibly large and diverse and rigid and durable an economy, robust of an economy, is because we have a larger trading market, open free trading market, just internally within our country than anyone else does. And so that allows us to have so much more robust of an economy to be able to be so much more prosperous. So any of these different subdivision or divorce models you're talking about, as long as that trade was left in place, then I think that you could potentially have something good. I think if you don't have that trade in place, I think the people will demand that trade pretty quickly. And I think that would be a big prerequisite for anything to actually happen. But going back to this question, yeah, I would say that I actually like the idea of, like, listen, if we're getting froggy about splitting up, why don't we talk first about splitting states up? Like Illinois, there's most of Illinois and then Chicagoland, and they are completely different in what they want. the rest of Illinois often feels held hostage by Chicagoland. If the demographics shifted enough where more and more people moved out in the suburbs, at some point Chicagoland may felt like they're being held hostage to the rest of Illinois. Let's just let them be two separate states. And same thing in California. I know there's like a state of Jefferson idea where part of Oregon and part of California would become a state, or part of Washington and Oregon or something like that. I mean, I think that we're quickly reaching a point where Atlanta and the rest of Georgia would like to be their own separate states. Why not do that? Like, I mean, if we're already talking about breaking up the status quo and splitting things up, one of the easiest ways to do it that doesn't make us touch on questions like who gets the nukes would be, just letting Atlanta and like literally the rest of Georgia split into two separate states. I think that would actually, and if that doesn't work out well, then maybe we should think twice about doing it at the national level. But I think that could potentially have a lot of outcome, and it does decentralize government even for those larger, like you said, the larger city states. Okay, great. You wanted all these policies. Now it's on you to fund it. So, let's see how that works out for you.
And, I frankly could see that working, because you've got the urban centers having the human capital, the human resources, as far as the production that they could offer.
Yeah.
And then the non-urban having the natural resources and the agriculture. I mean, that's ripe, man, for good free trade where everyone wants to trade with everyone.
Yeah. I mean, New York City has a larger population than quite a few states. And geographically, it's pretty large, too. I think geographically, it's bigger than like Connecticut or something like that. Like, go ahead and make it its own state. Like, let it be its own state. It's
Absolutely.
nothing. You go up into like Western New York and Northern New York. It's a completely different. They could be different countries. The difference between like Rochester, New York, and New York City is probably wider than the difference between Rochester, New York, and like right across the border in Canada. They probably have more in common with the other side of the national border with Canada than they do with their own so-called fellow statesmen in New York City. So I think that would definitely be a good first step, is breaking up allowing these municipalities to break up into smaller and more states.
Let's talk a little bit about what is the catalyst, right? A tipping point or a flashpoint for making this happen, because you've indicated with 100 years of progressive indoctrination, we're not thinking as a citizenry about the importance of freedom and self-worth and dignity and so forth, and we just are wondering what we can get from government. But let's say that we're like that. I think that one of three things is feasible to be a flashpoint, to be like, okay, as much as Spike and Rick can be talking their cerebral stuff, this just knocks that out the door. And I'm thinking that there is a issue with CBDC. There is an issue with a COVID-like and probably more severe pandemic, which completely disrupts supply chains. Yeah. Or there is something with AI when we have the interplay of, for instance, right now in the U.S. discussing not wanting the states to have any role in restricting it. So do you see AI, a CBDC, or an infectious disease thing as the most likely black swan? I guess if we're predicting it's not black, maybe it's gray. Yeah. Black swan event that might be a flashpoint to disrupt everything we know, and we break down a little bit, maybe more tribal, into city-states or state nations.
If I had to pick between those three, and this is going to possibly color knowing how I'm going to answer on how likely I think this is to happen. If I were to pick one of those three to be the most likely to cause it, it would be the pandemic and the response to it. I think CBDC, if it gets implemented, there's going to be some uproar, and then we've seen all the other financial changes that have happened that were at their time every bit as disruptive to freedom. The ending of Bretton Woods and the ending of the gold standard was, which basically, we say ending of the gold standard. And basically, it was Nixon going, we're going to decide arbitrarily with no kind of backstop what the dollar's worth. Like, that was the fact that didn't trigger something kind of says what happens is a certain number of people get outraged. That actually led to the creation of the Libertarian Party. A bunch of Republicans went, okay, we can't do this anymore. And but that was the extent of what happened. Some people got upset. A lot of very strongly written op-eds were strongly written and worded. And then that's what happened. I think with CBDC, unfortunately, a very similar thing. I think you'll have some people that are greatly radicalizes, but in terms of like a widespread thing, I think people just become more compliant, unfortunately. With AI, it's weird. I sometimes wonder if we're whistling past the graveyard with all this stuff, where in a few years, humanity is going to be coping with the fact that we're no longer the primary species in terms of intelligence. And what's that going to look like? Like, we're talking about like job losses. And it's like, listen, job losses, I know I apologize for keep going off on tangents, but I think this is important to talk about.
Love it.
We talk about job losses with AI. I'm like, listen, if everyone loses their job, that means everything effectively becomes like free, because, the actual like labor costs involved goes down next to nothing. And so you could argue that we end up in this weird kind of post-scarcity situation where like you just mention to you think internally to your implanted chip or whatever, or speak aloud to the listening device on your phone or your glasses or your watch something you want, and it just like comes to you and costs you fractions of a penny or something like that. So the job loss thing isn't as scary to me. It's the purpose loss.
Yes.
It's the like, what are we here for? Now, as a Christian, I already know the answer to what we're here for. And that doesn't scare me, because it's like, listen, my identity's in Christ. It's not in who I am or what I do on this earth. I do what I do, and I am who I am because I'm commanded by God to do so. That doesn't change with AI. But for those who don't have that grounding, for those who are just out here doing stuff and trying to haphazardly figure it out, and they don't have this like greater metaphysical belief as to why they're even here, if now they're not the ones, we've always augmented our big monkey brains with technology. This is something that we won't be augmenting our brains soon enough. It'll augmenting and multiplying our abilities. It's doing it, and it doesn't need us. And so we could actually end up in a situation where, God forbid, the thing doesn't think that we're necessary. It could actually eradicate us. And it won't be like Skynet. It won't be like Terminator, where a bunch of scrappy humans are fighting back. It'll like kill us at the cellular level and we won't even know it. So that's a nice thought. But anyway, all that to say, I don't think that I don't think that leads to decentralization, unless you mean like decentralization where like individual groups of human beings are hiding behind wreckage of the buildings or something like that. No, and I don't think that's actually what will happen. I think we will be very comfortable. I think we will have just about everything that we want, and I think a lot of us will be grappling with wondering why we're even here. So, but I don't think that's going to lend itself to any kind of widespread anything like that. That brings us back to the pandemic and responses to it. We kind of already saw what happened there. Like, people got angry. There were even protests and stuff like that. But like, people either complied or they didn't. And what do we see when they didn't comply? En masse. The authorities here anyway, for the most part, went, all right, well, unless you're doing anything egregious, we're going to kind of let you. I mean, yes, there are some case examples of like people being arrested for seeing their relatives and stuff, but that was in areas where everyone else was being compliant. In places in South Carolina, they wouldn't call it a lockdown because that was politically, not expedient to call it that. They called it like a pause or something like that. That lasted about a week or two. They were able to keep like the restaurant and event like maximum number of people in a building, like the occupancy limits, low for most of the year. Everything else was out the window. Even the mask mandates, we still technically had them, but people weren't following them. And it really is, if 3 to 5% of the population is like, yeah, I'm not doing this, they kind of can't enforce it. They can try to make examples out of a few people, like they do with, like, for example, with cannabis. But if enough people are just like, no, not doing it, then effectively it becomes as easy to violate the lockdowns as it is to get a bag of weed in South Carolina, which I'm told is pretty darn easy, even though we have no kind of, it is completely illegal here. There is no kind of medical anything. There's nothing. And yet it's just as easy to get it here as it is in a state where maybe not quite as easy because you can't just go to the store, but pretty darn easy to get it considering. But the good news of that is that kind of part of the reason why they don't enforce it is they know if they really tried to enforce it like that, it could trigger more of a widespread revolt. And so they kind of smartly take a step back and go, we've decided maybe we don't need this anymore. And we go, oh yeah, that's great that you decided that. We weren't following it anyway. So I'm not sure. I think that the American population, by and large, is entirely too comfortable to want any kind of like revolt. And so I think that when we look at decentralization, the only way it's effectively going to happen, whether it's through crisis or whether it's through just people realizing that this is better, it's going to come from people demanding it. A great case in point is Argentina. We look at Argentina electing this like radical anarcho-capitalist president who has gone in and slashing government left and right, and we're seeing the great results of it. Like they're having record economic growth, and this is after decades. And unfortunately, this had to happen first. Because they kept voting for left populists and then right populists and then left populists and right populists and kept voting for more and more progressivism, they got progressivism. They reached a point. Argentina went from being like the breadbasket and the bank of Central and South America. They were easily the wealthiest country. I think at one point, the per capita GDP of Argentina was higher than the US's. They went from being this very wealthy country to being one of the poorest ones on the planet. They had for decades, they had year over year, triple digit inflation. The price of things at least doubling every year, coupled with double-digit depression every year. Imagine being in a widespread economic depression where there was less and less money available to get, fewer and fewer jobs available to get, and the cost of living at least doubled every year. That's what it took for decades for the Argentinian public to look at a chainsaw-wielding madman and go, yeah, let's try that. You know what? Let's try it. And thank God they did. It's going great for them. So I want to try to create that, hey, let's try that without us needing to suffer through 40 plus years of what Argentina suffered through.
Right. You know, in that vein, I'm almost hoping that Mamdani will become mayor of New York City, because it's sort of like, okay, if this is what you think you want, and because it's more localized, maybe it'll have less impact on the rest of us. And maybe New Yorkers will say, holy crap, that sucks.
Yeah, that's not good.
And I guess socialism sucks. Maybe we'll try, freedom.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting watching that play out with Mamdani. And I will admit, I don't know all the details, but like, I saw a lot of people that are like, he's going to implement Sharia law and the Taliban. I took a quick look at his Twitter and he's talking about LGBTQIA++ rights. I'm like, yeah, I don't think he's going to be the Taliban. I think he's going to be like AOC as mayor. I don't just because he's I guess ethnically or religiously Muslim or where his parents are or whatever. I don't think we're getting Sharia law. I think what we're getting is just straight up left wing progressive socialism. And you know what? You might be right. I mean, if he gets in and gets his way, very quickly, New York is going to be like, oh, well, we didn't actually mean that. Like we just thought this was a great way of saying we hate Andrew Cuomo, which fair enough. But I get it. We don't like Adams or Cuomo. Okay, great. Maybe don't vote for the communists though. Like maybe we could pick someone else.
Wouldn't it be beautiful if New Yorkers really came to the realization that taxing the rich to give free stuff to everyone else actually doesn't work? I'll take it.
Taxing the rich, taxing yourselves into prosperity doesn't work. Wait until they see what happens when they open up these like government-run grocery stores, and because they can price everyone else out of the market, all of the actual stores that they've been relying on go away because they can't. How is what are they called? There's a Spanish name for it. It's not. Oh man. I'm going to remember it as soon as this episode's over. But there are these grocery stores all through like New York, and there's a Spanish word for it. Anyway, whatever it is, that's been how people get their groceries, right? They don't have like a Walmart or something there. Like they and there aren't like a bunch of like, there are some urban farms, but it's not like you can go like to farmers markets to get everything that you need, right? They need these small markets that are all over the city. So what happens when like these like handful of centrally located government-run co-ops or whatever it is Mamdani wants to do ends up pricing everyone else out of the market, and now you can't find food. And we know what government does with food. It's every time communists get in charge, people starve to death, and it's because like they can't effectively distribute food with other people's money. It's insane, but
and like everything
it ends up going very poorly.
like everything with socialism or communism, it ends up being even worse inequality because you have the connected people or the wealthy people that instead of like scrounging around for groceries, they're just going to zip off or send their butler or whatever to another state that doesn't have this ridiculousness and get the food that they need. It's always a two-tiered sort of system. And
Exactly. I just looked it up. It's bodegas. There's bodegas all over the city. That's how people get their food primarily.
Yeah.
Like groceries and stuff like that. And yeah, if all those go away, now what? Now you've got to take a bus probably a few miles, which is a lot. That's a long distance in New York City to try to get food. And because there's a rush on the market that they never anticipate, because central planning never anticipates anything very well. And now there's like a run on food. What you could very quickly, and people roll their eyes to think about this, but like you could very quickly see like New Yorkers fleeing the city because they're starving. Like to go from, while still being one of the wealthiest per capita areas, but this government so screwed up the distribution of food that people have to go to Connecticut to find food. Like that could happen. So yeah, I mean, I hope it doesn't take something like that. But yeah, if he gets elected and gets his way very quickly, in the same way that like some of the greatest anti-communists are people that come from the former Soviet bloc countries, they're like dead set against communism, better red than dead. It's because they lived it. So yeah, you could end up with New Yorkers that are, better dead than red New Yorkers. So yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. I've got a question. I'm particularly interested in hearing your answer. What would you say is the line between constitutionally sanctioned state defense and unlawful insurrection? And that, it could be different in your eyes versus the federal government's eyes, but can you find a line in there?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, the line is very blurred by the fact that any kind of state defense would be called unlawful insurrection to some extent. I mean, I will put it this way. I think that when you saw, the blur there is that you have people that say that the militia is the National Guard, and it literally is no such thing. Like it's not even really a state. It's hard to even call it a state-controlled thing when the federal government can grab it anytime they can grab the troops that it has and all of its resources anytime they want to, which is why, another example of nullification, I support Defend the Guard legislation. For those who don't know, Defend the Guard is legislation that says that unless Congress declares war, so it even has that weasel wording in there, right? So they can't claim that it makes National Guard completely unavailable. No, if you do it the way you're supposed to, if you declare war, then you can use it. If you don't declare war, then the governor has the prerogative to veto it and say, you can't use our troops. We're only available for congressionally declared wars. It's actually very modest. It's a very modest proposal. Mm-hmm. It doesn't say that they can't be used. It just says that the governor can choose to veto it. It doesn't say that they can't be used at all. It just, or it doesn't say that the governor can veto it anytime he wants to. It says he can only veto it if they don't declare war. So it's actually a very, very modest proposal, and something that I strongly support. I honestly so the difference between state level common defense. Now, are you still saying where it's being dictated and controlled at the state government level, or are you saying like common defense militias and things like that?
Yes, that as well. In fact, maybe in particular even that, because if you have a governor refusing and maybe a National Guard commander for the state sort of working with the governor who's refusing, they would be considered renegade. They would, in my mind, they'd no longer even be the National Guard. Yeah. So whether it's something like that or whether it's true militia, you have, people coming together to defend the state or defend whatever it is that they want to defend.
Yeah, so I guess defined by the people in charge, the line would be the second it isn't being used the way they'd like for it to. So even if it's completely sanctioned and legal and everything else, they're going to call it an insurrection the moment that when Defend the Guard passes, like if it ended up becoming the law of the land in enough states and you had a governor saying, no, we're not going to let our troops be used for these things, very quickly you'd have, and ironically, if passed as prologue, it would probably be a Republican administration doing it, since they're usually the ones that are the most effective in expanding neocon policy at scale because they neuter the opposition to it in Congress. Anyway, if that ended up happening, not that that's happening now, but anyway, when that happens, they would immediately, you'd start seeing the propaganda that pro-Russian, Islamo-fascist governors are engaging in an internal insurrection against the common defense that the American people deserve against whatever threat they've created. So I think that would probably be the line to them. The line to me, if you're asking me what the line is, are they doing this for the common defense of the people in that state? Or are they actually trying to engage in some kind of insurrection, right? Like the line should be the actual wording you said. So it should be intuitive. But the line as defined by the people in charge is like, can we grab these people and throw them at a foreign country? No? Okay, then it's illegal. You can't do that.
Yeah. Excellent. I have to say that your impression of a neocon is very similar to that of a surfer dude.
Oh, that's just the voice. Yeah, that's the voice I use. Here's the thing. I was a neocon. So when 9/11 happened, I was like 19 years old. So in my defense, I was 19 and I was also a drug addict. So I mean, whatever. But it's funny. It was shortly after I became sober that I became a libertarian. So there's probably something to be said there.
There could be some correlation.
It wasn't me. It was the drugs. But anyway, 9/11 happened. And I completely bought the media and government line, hook, line, and sinker. I just believed it. I didn't know any better. I heard that, I just saw this terrible thing happen. I was worried it was going to have more of it was going to happen. At the time, you're like, is this our new normal? Are we going to have 9/11s happening left and right and buildings getting, attacked, terrorists blowing up things left and right? And they made it sound like that could very well happen. And then we're getting told, there's this terrorist group and they want to create a worldwide Islamic caliphate. And they didn't mention that the CIA had essentially created them and had been funding and arming them for years. And then they said, and they hate us because we're really free. And I was like, yeah, that's terrible. Let's do something about that. Yeah, well, what we need to do is invade Iraq. Okay, all right, well, then let's invade Iraq. Yeah, because Saddam Hussein was working with him. No, he wasn't. But, I thought at the time, and I remember I saw Colin Powell with the yellow cake, and I'm like, Saddam Hussein's going to get sarin gas or whatever it was. And he's like, this much sarin gas or whatever it was can kill 10 million people, 10,000, whatever it was, people. And I'm like, if Al-Qaeda gets that and comes here, they're going to kill us all. We need to invade Iraq. Like, I bought it. I was a kid. I bought it. And it was people like Matt Kibbe and Ron Paul and people that were from the right-wing side explaining like, this is a terrible idea, that finally got me to realize that they were right. It was not the I'm only protesting because a Republican is president protesters that were out there like doing the angry liberal anti-war protests across the country. That did nothing for me. It was libertarians saying, hey, this is stupid, that made me realize that they were right. So when I speak as a neocon, I'm channeling late teens, early 20s Spike. So maybe that's what I sounded like back then.
That makes sense. All right, Spike, hey, I appreciate the time you've given us. If you will, I'd like to just do a few rapid fire questions.
Sure, let's do it.
I prepped up. You've already answered several, so we've got just a couple here.
Sure.
If you could explain in one sentence to our viewers, nullification.
Nullification is the idea that at a more local level of government, they nullify. I mean, I guess technically it could be both ways, but it is essentially, it is one level of government. Typically the way we use it, it's one level of government simply nullifying the law, or at least the enforcement of a law that's being done by another level of government. Technically, the nullification can be done by us, the people, but more commonly it's done at a municipal or a state level against the federal level. Technically, it can happen the other way too, but usually it happens that way.
Sure. The best state that you would want to launch a freedom revival in this sense of secession or decentralization?
Oh my gosh. Wow. Well, I guess I could say South Carolina because I wouldn't have to go as far.
Yeah.
I could just do it here. I could stay right here on this chair. If we're doing it by the state that, to me, it's funny, South Carolina is the one where like our capital and our cities are kind of similar and reflective to our more rural areas. Maybe not a lot, but like far more than like an Illinois or a New York or a California. I'd say the one that could show it to work the best, I would probably pick either New York or California, and especially with California, because California has this like underlying libertarian current that's just completely choked out by the statist centers of power in like the Bay Area and the greater LA area and all of that. So I would pick either, I guess, New York or California.
Cool. Okay. You were maybe reluctant, but I'm going to ask you, pick the first federal agency that you would shut down if you had the power.
If the Federal Reserve were considered an agency, I would pick that one, because like decapitating the monster from the top. If the government can't print out endless money, they got to get real serious about their policy priorities immediately. If they can't just print out monopoly money and hand it off to everyone.
Okay, crypto enthusiasts believe that crypto is the future of freedom. Do you agree?
It's certainly it may be the economic component or the currency component to it. I will say, I think at this point, there's absolutely no reason for the government to be involved in the issuance of currency. I think the minute that you separate state and money and make it so that the free market is determining what money is, the value of your money is no longer a political question. It's an economic one. It's one that's being decided by people who have a vested financial interest in your money becoming more valuable over time, or at least retaining its value, as opposed to right now, where from a policy standpoint, for a taxing and spending and debt accumulating government, the best way for them to keep that going is to consistently devalue your currency. So they actually have a financial vested interest in your money losing value over time. So yeah, I would say it's at least that component of the future of freedom.
Okay. The percentage likelihood that we will see a national divorce or at least a single state secession in the next 10 years?
National divorce, I would say 0. Single state secession, let's get spicy and say 5%. I think it's very unlikely, but it could happen.
Okay. Civil disobedience. Let's talk, blocking roadways and so forth. Do you think that it is effective? It's effective in some manner. Do you think it's effective positively for the people that are conducting that civil disobedience, or do you think it is negatively impacting them? It gets negative attention. People are pissed off. They don't want to join the movement. However, it gets them heard. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a very effective way to make me hate them, or I should say hate them, to make me go, hey guys, whatever it is you're talking about, like you're blocking the road. Put it this way, we do rallies. We'll do rallies for like some of our causes, but we don't do them in the traffic. Putting aside the fact that you're violating people's rights. So like if someone can only go this way in their car and you're stopping them, you're affecting, and especially like sometimes they'll then cordon off around them and not let them back up and stuff. You're kidnapping people. You're temporarily holding people hostage. Like that's so even just setting that, I don't think we should set that aside. But if we pretend for a moment that it's okay to do things to violate people's rights, if it's effective, I don't think it's effective. You know what's effective? The rallies that we do are effective. We do family friendly rallies where people can like bring their kids and sometimes people will start people can grill and stuff like that. Like it's basically like an outside block party, and we're staying out of people's way. We don't even get in the way of the sidewalk. We leave the place cleaner than we found it. And people that are walking by want to hear what we're about. So we tell them and they go, wow, that's very interesting. And we go, yeah, we're about to walk into City Hall and tell them what we think in 20 minutes. Come join us. Those are very effective. And even if people don't agree with what we're rallying for, which is very rare, they at least look and go, no, they didn't bother anyone. I thought it was a party. I didn't even realize they were protesting until I got closer and saw that they had signs and stuff. So no, I don't think it's effective to kidnap people and make them angry. I think it is effective in making people want a even bigger police state that that they'll cheer when they show up and start rubber bulleting and pepper spraying and tear gassing everyone.
Right. Okay, final question, which you just had a nice little segue here. Your one sentence pitch for You Are the Power, and then if you could leave us where our viewers could find you and your organization.
Yeah, one sentence pitch. We find people whose lives are being completely destroyed by local and statewide government officials. We rally the public around reaching out to those specific individual officials who are doing these actions, and we have them direct their attention to telling those officials to back off and do the right thing. Since we were founded, we have had a roughly 90% success rate. Over the last 2 years, we've had a 100% success rate. And if you want to join us in doing that, go to youarethepower.
Fantastic. Spike, man, it's been a pleasure. I've had fun. Hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, this was great. I enjoyed this. Thanks, Rick.
Cool. Thanks. Have a good night.
Thank you, man.